the Trump administration absolutely screwed up. Those aren't critics' words, they're JD Vance's. The vice president admits the White House mishandled the Epstein files. Then he makes an even more explosive claim, alleging Epstein had ties to the highest levels of American and Israeli intelligence. The controversy is about to explode again. The Trump administration mishandled the Jeffrey Epstein files. That admission has now come from US Vice President JD Vance himself. But he didn't stop there. During a wide-ranging interview, Vance also reignited one of the most controversial theories surrounding Epstein, claiming the disgraced financier had connections to the highest levels of both American and Israeli intelligence. Speaking during a 3-hour interview on the Joe Rogan Experience, Vice President JD Vance acknowledged that the Trump administration had absolutely screwed up its handling of communications surrounding the Jeffrey Epstein files.
We absolutely screwed up the comms of the Epstein files, like we just did. But do I think the reason we screwed up the comms is because we were trying to hide something? No. I think the reason we screwed up the comms of the Epstein files is one, Pam Bondi said, the client list is on my desk. And I think that she, got roasted for it publicly by a lot of people, including me. Like, you and I have talked about this a lot. I'm like one of the OG.
Vance said the administration's public messaging had created unnecessary confusion and speculation, particularly after former Attorney General Pam Bondi suggested that an Epstein client list was sitting on her desk awaiting release. According to Vance, the administration should have released all available material much earlier, once investigators had completed the necessary review and removed information that could identify victims. He argued that the slow and confusing rollout only fueled public suspicion, while rejecting suggestions that officials had deliberately tried to conceal evidence. The controversy intensified after the Department of Justice and the FBI later concluded there was no evidence that Epstein maintained a so-called client list and announced that no further records would be released, disappointing many supporters who had expected major new disclosures. Vance then turned to one of the most controversial aspects of the Epstein case. Responding to comments by podcast host Joe Rogan, the American vice president claimed Epstein clearly had connections to the highest levels of both American and Israeli intelligence.
Clearly had connections to the highest levels of American intelligence. Prime Minister Netanyahu, not a particularly popular person in the United States of America right now. Epstein seemed to be connected to the elements of the Israeli deep state that.
However, Vance did not provide evidence to support that assertion. US authorities have never publicly concluded that Epstein had ties to the CIA, Mossad, or any other intelligence agency. Vance's remarks have now reopened two politically sensitive debates at once: questions over how the Trump administration handled the Epstein files, and renewed speculation surrounding Epstein's alleged intelligence connections. Together, they have injected fresh controversy into an issue that has continued to dominate political discussion long after Epstein's death. US Vice President JD Vance has launched one of his strongest public attacks yet on what he claims was an Israeli-backed campaign to undermine the Trump administration's efforts to end the war with Iran. Speaking on the Joe Rogan Experience, Vance accused elements within the Israeli government of funding a coordinated influence operation designed to derail the negotiations and keep the conflict going. Vance said the allegations were backed by a recent Time magazine investigation, which he claimed exposed a very discreet, extremely well-funded campaign, targeting him personally because of his role in negotiating last month's memorandum of understanding aimed at ending the Iran war.
There's this Time article that came out yesterday. A friend sent it to me. It's like worth reading because it lists a bunch of people who have quite literally been paid by a former Trump campaign person who was himself paid by certain elements within the Israeli government. And those people are attacking me viciously for quite literally trying to accomplish the negotiation objective that the president set for the country.
Notably, the Time report stated that former Trump campaign manager Brad Parscale and his company, Clock Tower X, were hired last September through an advertising agency to run a pro-Israel influence campaign funded by the Israeli government. According to U.S. Foreign Agents Registration Act filings cited by the magazine, the campaign was officially intended to combat rising anti-Semitism online. However, Time quoted an Israeli Foreign Ministry official as saying its actual objective was to prevent young conservative Americans from turning against Israel. The report also suggested that several conservative influencers involved in the campaign published coordinated criticism of the Memorandum of Understanding signed last month to end the Iran war. Parscale acknowledged that the campaign aimed to maintain support for Israel among young conservatives, but denied it was intended to undermine the administration's diplomacy. Vance, however, rejected that explanation.
Foreign governments try to influence the United States all the time. Israel does it, other countries do it. It's just sort of the nature of the beast. What bothers me is actually when Americans allow, meaning American leadership, allows that influence to affect their judgment and to affect what they are advocating for. That's what really bothers me. People are always going to try to influence the United States of America, whether they're allies of ours or whether they're enemies of ours. But again, when I open up the pages of Time magazine and I see that there's a literal foreign influence campaign being funded to tank the very deal that I was pursuing, and oh, by the way, many of the people who were receiving that money were actually attacking me in completely dishonest ways, my response to that is, well, go to hell. I'm going to do what I have to do for the American people. I represent Americans first.
Vance went further, claiming he knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that some individuals within the Israeli system were attempting to manipulate American public opinion to prolong the military campaign against Iran indefinitely. Despite those accusations, Vance rejected suggestions that Israel alone had driven the United States into the conflict. He said President Donald Trump independently believed Iran should never obtain a nuclear weapon, a position Vance said he also supports. Discussing the negotiations, the American vice president argued there remains a divide within Iran's leadership between pragmatists seeking an agreement with Washington and hardliners determined to continue confrontation. Vance's remarks mark one of the sharpest public criticisms yet from a senior member of the Trump administration towards elements within the Israeli establishment. As negotiations over Iran continue, his comments also expose growing tensions over whether diplomacy or military pressure should shape the next phase of US policy in the Middle East.